Welcome to this webinar on Safeguarding Essentials. We are aiming to offer you some practical guidance in terms of how to safeguard your loved ones and empower you with the knowledge that you need to do this. Obviously, what we're discussing covers some sensitive topics, such as types of abuse that can affect vulnerable people. That may be distressing to some people, so for your own well-being, if you feel you need to take a break from the session, please do if you find the material challenging. It will be recorded, so you can always go back and watch any sections later on if you wish. Also, there will be support available. We're going to be sharing a number of resources and contact details that if you are affected by any of the issues covered in this webinar, you'll be able to seek advice and support. So in terms of getting the best out of this session, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the chat section. I will answer any questions at the end of the session, so please don't feel I'm ignoring you if you've posted a question and I haven't come back to you immediately. If you have any follow-up questions after the event has finished, please feel free to get in touch with myself, Jo Cleary. My email is here on the screen and will come out in the follow-up information as well. So, as I said, my name is Jo Cleary. I am Learning and Development Manager for Unique Senior Care. I've been with the organisation for over 12.5 years now, and we are a care provider. We provide domiciliary care going into people's own homes within the Midlands region, within Warwickshire, Solihull, Coventry and Kenilworth. We also have a live-in service, which is national now in various different parts of England. And we have several extra care housing schemes where we provide care as well. So that includes Briarcroft in Stratford, Queensway and Leamington Spa, Tide Lodge in Southam, and Ettington Lodge in Wellesbourne. For us at Unique, safeguarding is a very important topic and it's been our focus for this week. We've also got our carers and team members involved with an interactive safeguarding quiz to enable them to learn and develop their knowledge and help us to support them better. So in this webinar, we're going to be thinking about different types of abuse. Emotional abuse is the kind of abuse that might affect someone's mental well-being and can include things like verbal threats or intimidation, manipulation, or isolating somebody. It can be particularly difficult to spot because it can be very subtle. So for that reason, it often goes undetected. Physical abuse can include the obvious things like being kicked, slapped, or punched. It can also include someone being over-sedated with a medication. A particularly difficult area to think about is sexual abuse, particularly when we think about older and vulnerable people. This can range from any type of non-consensual sexual activity, which can also include things like being forced to watch a sexual act or pornographic materials. We'd also need to think about capacity in this area, because somebody who, for example, is living with dementia or more serious memory issues may not recognise or have the mental capacity to make a decision about their sexual contact with others. Next is financial abuse. Now, unfortunately, this is very common. Around 1 to 2% of older people are thought to have been financially abused in some way. And that means that somebody over 65 actually experiences financial abuse every 40 seconds. And finally, neglect. This is where somebody's needs are not met. That might be their healthcare needs. It might be their needs for food and drink or medication, or for their personal care. And if a person lacks ability to do these things for themselves, then they might self-neglect. We know from the statistics from elder abuse that in 2020, around 180,000 women and 98,000 men experienced domestic abuse from the Age UK report. We also know that the charity Hourglass disclosed in a survey that 20% of UK residents are connected to an older person who's faced abuse. And they also suggest that as many as 2.7 million older people might be affected by abuse across the country in 2020. What we know in addition to that is that during the COVID pandemic, rates of domestic abuse and financial abuse also increased sharply. So how do we be aware of and spot signs of abuse where they're happening? It's really important to recognise that many cases go unreported. Sometimes that's because people don't know what to look for. Other times it's because they're fearful of reporting abuse, because perhaps it's being carried out by someone who's close to them, or they're fearful of the repercussions. Signs of financial abuse can include things like changes in financial situations, unexplained withdrawals from the person's bank accounts, changing a will, particularly at short notice, or possessions going missing. You might also notice a person that should be able to afford their bills is getting behind, perhaps getting late notice emails or letters through the post. Emotional abuse, the signs of this are often the person withdrawing, perhaps being low in mood, being fearful or anxious, particularly around certain individuals. And physical abuse, there may be injuries such as unexplained bruises and a reluctance to explain how those injuries happened. Again, a really difficult one to think about, but with sexual abuse, some of the common signs can be bruises around intimate areas, unexplained sexually transmitted diseases, and sudden changes in behaviour or mood. As I mentioned earlier, any type of sexual contact could be considered a safeguarding concern if the person has got to a stage where they cannot recognise the person, even if it's their own husband or wife or loved one, or the stage where they're not able to make their own decisions anymore. And finally, neglect. The signs of this might be that the person is losing weight, perhaps their hygiene is not up to its usual standard, medical issues are going untreated, or they're living in unsafe or unhygienic conditions. One of the most important things we can do when we're concerned about an individual is trust our instincts. Quite often in cases of abuse, when investigations are carried out, they'll find people very early on who had a gut feeling. They felt something was right with a person or a situation, but didn't speak up, or perhaps they did speak up and weren't listened to. So it's really important, if you have a niggling feeling, a gut feeling, to trust your instincts and to speak to somebody that you trust about it, or in more serious cases, to go directly to the people that you need to access support from, such as safeguarding team or police, and we'll talk more about those later. We do need to balance that, because obviously we can sometimes have feelings or thoughts that are not factual, so we need to be objective and weigh up the situation, and that's where perhaps talking to a trusted individual or seeking advice from a professional organisation can be really helpful. It's also an important aspect to safeguarding is to be inclusive and understand that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone is unique in terms of their background and their circumstances. It might be that we need to respect the differences in cultures, religions, or personal backgrounds that differ from our own. and make sure that we're adapting our communication to meet that particular person's individual understanding, preferences and communication styles. That could mean, for example, accessing help from an advocate or someone who can offer translation services, or trying to understand a different culture or a background that's not familiar to us. It's also really important to respect people's rights. When we're concerned about an individual, sometimes it's easy to jump in and try and protect them and keep them safe. And that is important. Protection is one of the 6 safeguarding principles from the Care Act. But so is empowerment. So we need to remember that our approach needs to include partnering with other people, empowering the individual that we're concerned about, so that they get to make their own choices and have a say in how things are dealt with. Of course, where someone lacks mental capacity to do that, we should involve them as fully as possible, but we may then make a best interest decision on their behalf. Now, if we do become concerned about abuse that may be happening with somebody, then we need to get very good at gathering information. It's best to do this right from the start. If we have concerns, then asking open questions to that individual, having meaningful conversations to try and find out about how they are and what's going on. So by that, I mean not asking any leading questions that put answers or thoughts into their minds, but asking them in ways that allow them to tell us what they're concerned about or what's been happening. We use our skills as well to notice any changes in that person. At Unique Care, one of our most important principles is that we have carers who have regular clients so that they can build up a good relationship with that person. And when you know that individual really well, you're much more likely to notice if something is different from usual. We also need to think about any important information we might need to preserve. So, for example, we might need to photograph an injury or a crime scene, make sure that bedding or clothing is not washed, or again, it's difficult to think about, but in the case of sexual abuse, asking the person not to wash themselves until they've been in contact with the police. We might also need to keep copies or photographs of any messages or threatening communications that may have been carried out as part of abuse or crime. And although so far in this webinar we've focused mainly on abuse, types of abuse and signs, it's important to recognise that safeguarding is actually broader than just thinking about abuse. It can include a range of situations that might affect an individual's safety or well-being. So, for example, an older adult might need referring for help from a safeguarding team because they're neglecting themselves or because they've got issues around their ability to make their own decisions. It might be that they are at a very high risk of falling and injuring themselves, or perhaps leaving their home late at night or in a state of confusion. Sometimes we do need to put safeguards in place, but it's always important to think about other options that can help as well, such as technology. So, for example, many family members will worry about a relative and lock them in their home. And that's very well-meaning. Usually it's very well-intentioned to try and keep them safe, but it could pose additional risks, for example, not being able to get out in a fire. And it also affects and infringes that person's rights to their freedom of movement. So if you are worried about a loved one going out late at night, or if they get confused, you might consider other options, such as a door sensor, which will alert you if they leave, or using other forms of assistive technology that get used to the patterns of someone moving around their own home and alert you to any changes. So when we have concerns, as I've mentioned previously, it's really important to act quickly and to take steps to safeguard that individual and report those concerns on. There are various different organisations and resources that you can access in order to do this. The local government association, for example, offers guidance on working with carers and the importance of safeguarding. Carers UK is an organisation that supports and advises people caring for loved ones, friends or family. That includes financial and practical support and health and wellbeing advice as well. NHS England Safeguarding has a role in protecting children, young people and adults, and offers a range of different resources to help us understand what safeguarding and abuse is and how we can act. Each area will also have its own safeguarding team and safeguarding adults board. It's very easy to contact your local safeguarding team. There'll be a range of options of how to do that, including through online reports or chat, or through making a phone call. NHS Support and Benefits is a website that will give information on how you can access things like carers assessment, support from local councils, or respite care. And the NICE guidance on safeguarding adults in care homes is a really useful piece of information and resource to look at if one of your loved ones is in a care home setting. We know that neglect is the most common form of abuse that can happen in care homes. Skills for Care are an organisation that supports the care sector, and their website is full of information about all sorts of aspects of care and lots of learning materials around safeguarding as well. The Office of the Public Guardian is an organisation that you can go to if you have any concerns about a person who's acting as a court-appointed deputy or as a power of attorney for somebody. Obviously, we've got emergency services, so if there is an urgent need for help, we would always advise that you call them first. In a less serious situation, you can call the police on 101, which is the non-emergency number, or in a less serious medical situation where you want to seek advice, there is also the 111 service that can be accessed. So I'm going to allow some time to have a look at the questions in the chat before we finish for today. So do take a moment to add any additional questions if you have any. But before I look at those, just a reminder that we are on social media, so do stay connected with us. You'll be able to see any updates and further learning opportunities. We're going to be running a series of different learning events this year to enable us to share some of our knowledge and skills at Unique Care with the public, and also linking in with other professionals and experts in different areas. As I've mentioned, the webinar has been recorded and this will be available to you to look back at. And we'll have other webinars and other sessions I've mentioned coming up for the rest of this year. But do feel free to contact me directly if there's anything that you want to ask about or any further information that you'd like on safeguarding or on any of the other webinars that I've run. And my email is jo.cleary@uniquecare.co.uk. So I'm going to go over to the chat section now and have a look at the questions that have come up. So how can we effectively support someone who might not be aware they're experiencing abuse, ensuring we do so sensitively? So that's a really good question. quite often people don't think of what's happening to them as abuse. They might have been in a relationship where they've been used to being treated that way, or they might have even had a difficult childhood and had experiences that make them think that this is a normal way for their life to be. So it's really important we partner with that person and we help them to be empowered and to learn about what is healthy behaviour, what is appropriate behaviour, and where people might be overstepping the marks. It is a really difficult, sensitive situation, but just being there for that person, perhaps sharing with them some online resources about what abuse is and what can be classed as abuse. So, for example, if they're experiencing something that can be quite covert, like a coercive behaviour, then you might be able to help them to see that it isn't acceptable behaviour and is something that they can seek help on. I hope that's answered that question. Feel free to pop another comment in if there's anything else you wanted on that one. Next question, how should we handle confidentiality with dealing with potential safeguarding issues? So there are opportunities to speak with safeguarding teams confidentially to discuss a case or concern, but often it's really important that we do disclose the details. Sometimes we might need to go directly to the police or safeguarding teams. Sometimes we might need to talk to the individual and get them involved and let them make the decisions if they've got the capacity to do so around what the next step is. Really important if we do make any notes or record anything, for example, a photograph, that we make sure that once those pieces of information have been passed on to the appropriate agencies, that we're keeping those in a confidential way, for example, deleting them from devices or making sure that they won't be accessed by other people. Again, hopefully that's answered that question, but if there's anything more that you want to know, please just pop it in the comments. I've also got a question or two on the question and answer section. So do we have links and contact details for the organisations? Yes, of course. So towards the end of the webinar, I talked through a number of different resources and organisations. All of those will be available and sent with the recording. And the last question, what is the safeguarding team and how do you get in touch with them? Are they local authority based? Yes, so a safeguarding team is local to your area. In most areas, there is an adults and older people safeguarding team, which will deal with older people and anyone over the age of 18, and then a separate team that will deal with children and younger people. Occasionally in some areas, such as Warwickshire, they have one team which works across all of the age groups, and that was a decision taken locally to improve the communication about cases that affected families. So a safeguarding team is the team responsible for following up on concerns about abuse or other safeguarding harm-related concerns. So they will take the report or the referral that's come in and take the appropriate action, partnering, of course, with other agencies such as police or healthcare professionals as needed. I'm just going to have another look at the chat to see if there were any further questions. Okay, thank you for all your questions. It's really helpful to have some, so I know that I can fill you in on the things that perhaps we haven't covered. That's wonderful. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I'm going to finish up the section for today. Thank you so much for your time, for watching. This is a really, really important topic. I hope it's helped to give you a starting point, but do check out the email with the links to the further resources where you can learn a lot more as well. Thank you.